Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, from me, Guy Monson, to our regular 6-minute strategy summary. While I've been away, the economic recovery has continued, and we're holding at Saracen to our 6.1% GDP number for full year 2021, the strongest since the early 70s. But darker clouds are gathering. First and foremost, the acceleration of the Delta variant is really beginning to impact consumer behaviour. Retail sales weaker in the US, in China, and most recently this morning here in the UK. Secondly, the Chinese economy more widely is slowing in the aftermath of tighter COVID restrictions around the country, and that of course has big implications for commodity prices around the world. Thirdly, emerging markets more generally are suffering from low vaccination rates and rising inflation rates. And this is putting real pressure on growth and unfortunately on interest rates. Fourthly and finally, we've had another warning on climate from the IPCC in the run-up to COP26. So we'll try and wrap these themes together, see what they mean for the taper programme of central banks, and most importantly what they mean for asset allocation and for your portfolio. Before we begin, just a brief comment on the Afghan economy amidst the current tragedy. I've plotted here Afghan GDP growth back to 1979, the Soviet invasion, through the civil war of 1994-6, Taliban occupation, 9/11, the first democratic elections, and up to the present day. Two things stand out. One, GDP is noticeably negative under civil war or Taliban occupation. And secondly, for all its faults, the US-led administration did achieve a modicum of positive growth and stability. As I mentioned earlier, the dramatic global recovery continues, with exceptionally strong growth in 2021 rolling into 22 and 23, as you can see on this panel. Much of that supported by US and global stimulus, improving vaccination data, at least in the developed world, and a general adaptation to a post-COVID economy. But darker clouds are emerging, and there are some worries. First of all among these is the Delta variant, of course, and the rise in COVID infections that it's triggering. I plotted on the right new COVID cases per 1 million people in the last 7 days. That's rising sharply in the US, rising again, I'm afraid, in the UK, and beginning now to accelerate in Germany. That's affected retail sales around the world and hit consumer confidence in the US particularly hard, the biggest drop in 11 years. In the survey report, they said it was an emotional response from dashed hopes that the pandemic would soon end. I think we're going to see more of this. Second, of course, the Chinese economy is beginning to slow on a number of fronts. Almost all our indicators are weakening. Part of that is the aftermath of the floods, but mostly it's tighter COVID restrictions. I plotted here the COVID stringency index for the UK and China, and you can see in the first quarter of the year the UK restrictions were far tighter. Now we've reversed positions as Boris Johnson has eased at the same time that Xi Jinping has tightened controls in the face of rising Delta numbers. That's hit the economy and particularly hit manufacturing. And you can see the fall off in the manufacturing sentiment index here. Remember, below 50 indicates some form of contraction. Thirdly, the emerging world is coming under tremendous pressure, mainly from low vaccine deliveries. A chart from the IMF on the left to the end of July showed that about 45% of the population received vaccine deliveries in the advanced economies, 11% in the emerging economies, and a pitiful 2% in the low-income countries. This is putting enormous pressure on growth and infection rates. In addition, of course, you've got rising inflation from tighter supply chains and rising commodity prices. Roll that together, and emerging market economies are actually having to tighten interest rates. Brazil, Hungary, Mexico, Russia, Turkey have all raised their rates, putting particular pressure on their underlying economies. Fourthly and finally, we've had another stark warning on the climate front from the IPCC in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow at the end of October. On the right-hand side, you can see the attribution of the warming that we've seen over the last 150 years and how that is split between natural factors and human factors. That human number a real wake-up, and I think that will reinforce some of these tough decarbonisation targets that governments are increasingly adopting. So where does that leave us overall? Well, first of all, let's take a quick look at our inflation dashboard, which we've had in previous reports. Broadly, it's indicating inflation pressures beginning to roll over. prices paid at US factory gates beginning to subside. Importantly, used car prices just beginning to come off. Remember that used cars, new cars and rental cars accounted together for more than half the increase in the core US CPI in the second quarter. Also on the right, we've seen some softness in commodity prices, food prices thankfully coming off, copper correcting, and I haven't plotted here, but a sharp fall in iron ore. What does that mean for equity markets? Well, markets have consolidated, come off a little bit in recent days, but are still up 12%, extraordinary for a UK investor in 2021. Gilts rallying a little bit, now off just 2.5%, growth and value running neck and neck, and on the bottom there, the equity VIX index, a sharp rise in volatility. So where does that leave our positioning? Well, for our traditional accounts, we're holding with our overweight in global equities. We are deliberately running a higher precautionary cash balance, and we're particularly cautious on emerging market economies ex-China. For our target return accounts, where we have an absolute benchmark, we're a little bit more cautious, and we have moved to a neutral weighting. Well, more of this as I update you in future talks, but I hope that's helpful now that I'm back. Thank you so much.